Back in 1999, I worked for a few different landscaping companies throughout high school. My father was a carpenter and a plumber, so I grew up in the trades from a very young age. And I just remember those early years as a landscaper. It was a new venture, a new experience working as a young teenager. And I had a very strong work ethic that I got from my father. And I noticed that I worked for smaller companies, and there was a big disconnect between what they were setting up for expectations with the homeowners and what we were actually doing. And we just followed, directives of our boss at the time. And for a couple of years, I always said to myself, I feel like I can do this better. I feel like there's something to be done differently here. And I had a fairly strong entrepreneurial drive. So it was the spring of '99. I got out of high school. I worked for a couple of months with a landscaping company. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go on my own. That same summer, my older brother was a carpenter in Burlington, and he taught me how to build decks. I already knew carpentry background, but he specifically did a deck business. So I went and worked with him for a summer, learned how to build decks, came back and started Paradisaic Custom Decks and Landscaping.
Cool. And where did you get that entrepreneurial drive from?
I don't know. Neither one of my parents had it.
Yeah.
I think it was just maybe a natural inclination to want to do something on my own. I knew what it was like working for people, and I worked very hard for my bosses at the time. So I had that. I was a very good employee in that sense, but I just felt like there was bigger things to be had.
Cool.
We talked about that before. I mean, I think there's a part of that you said.
To explain.
You said that at least once to me, you related the idea that part of being an entrepreneur was differentiating yourself as well from like the mainstay of like the family business and the way everybody else had gone, right? That if you started your own business, you were able to kind of do your own thing that was made on your own thing rather than made on the backs of anybody else's reputation at the time as well, right?
Yeah.
Like that seemed to at least be something that I kind of...
Yeah, no, that's a huge part of it. I didn't necessarily have the opportunity to take over business either, but you had to start somewhere. And I had that, it's hard to explain that internal want.
So so then you broke off from, who is it, your brothers?
So I worked with him just learning, and then I came back to Oshawa.
Yeah.
And I started I registered the business name.
Yeah.
I put an ad in the paper for decks, custom decks.
Yeah.
And I got 2 jobs that summer.
And at that time, you were building it.
I was building
them. You were the solopreneur. You were building that.
I went and met them. I drew up the job on graph paper.
Yeah.
Priced it out, probably grossly too low. And I built 2 decks that summer, and I still know the addresses of those 2 decks I built.
Cool. Very cool. So and then now, like, fast forward to now you're 20 years in business. Obviously, there's like tons of stuff that you've learned along the way. What would you say, like, if you can boil it down to like 3 things? Like
of what I've learned along the way?
So you just started this business from scratch. You were a solopreneur building decks. Now where are you guys? Year 20 of your business.
Sorry, what was the question?
What's that evolution from that timeline? You're a teenager starting this company.
Oh, you want to kind of just walk you through to where we got to now?
Yeah.
So those first few couple years in the early days was essentially me, and I'd have a friend come and help me here and there. It was what year did I meet you? Was it 2008, 2009?
We were talking about this the other day with Greg. I think I was 18.
Let's do the math quickly.
34, so 16 years ago. 16 years ago. So 16 years ago, yeah, I guess would be 2003. But Greg was with you before that.
Yes. So the first early years, I would put an ad in the paper looking for a helper for the summer help,
right?
Because it was a seasonal business.
Sure.
In the winter times, I was still doing my plumbing apprenticeship.
Okay.
So the summertime, spring, summer, and fall, I was still doing the deck business. I'd put an ad in the paper, get some helpers, and we slowly just kind of tackled jobs in that fashion for a couple of years. I probably didn't get. Oh man!
You found Greg.
Yeah. So
who's the only person of our generation that reads newspapers and could take up that ad.
So our project manager today, Greg, has been with me the longest. Second to that would be Rich.
Right.
But Greg was fresh out of high school when he came and worked with me for a summer. We built a couple of decks and sheds in Whitby, and then he went back to school. And we started actually doing more landscaping than decks.
Right.
It was a more popular type of service.
Sure.
More people do landscaping than decks.
Yeah.
Not everyone has a backyard that can handle a deck. So we actually did more landscaping and patios. And so that was kind of, I would say probably 75% of our drive and our business was doing landscaping with as much woodwork as we possibly could, you know, in between those landscaping jobs.
Right.
So between 2000 and 2010, we were a deck and landscaping business. We were slowly getting bigger. We incorporated in 2005. We had probably 4 or 5 employees at that time. And we got busier and busier. In the deck side, there was a trend starting with decks that was starting to come forth in the late 2000s, before 2010, and we were getting fairly busy. We were accumulating equipment with landscaping stuff, and we partnered up with a company, a landscaping company in Whitby, that was looking for someone to help them build their woodworking products because all of their employees were, you know, masons and landscapers. Right. And so it got my wheels turning, being like, okay, you know what, my guys don't really enjoy landscaping. It's very laborious. It takes a lot of equipment. And we enjoyed woodworking more. So we kind of made a informal partnership, being like, any landscaping jobs we get, we'll send to you. Any woodworking jobs you get, we'll do. So in 2010, we got out of landscaping and we switched over to decks, just strictly a deck company. In 2010 to 2015, we experienced a lot of growth in decks. We ended up, that's around the same time that show Decked Out came out.
Right.
It was become a lot more awareness, what people could do in their backyards with different products and stuff like that. Composite deck was really, there was a lot of different brands coming out, so it's becoming more and more popular.
Yeah.
So between 2010 and 2015, we made a fairly good name for ourselves in the deck world. We joined up with a couple of organizations throughout North America that specialize in decks and railings and any types of those kind of structures. We ended up qualifying and winning multiple national awards for decks that we've built right here in Oshawa, which was pretty big achievement for our guys, considering
It was the little Oshawa shop that could, right? Sitting beside the guys in Beverly Hills in California and award shows, and they're
amazing.
like, Oshawa where?
Yeah.
You guys can dig in the ground in the ice in Canada? That's
literally like up against California companies building in Malibu. And we had a deck in Oshawa, North Oshawa, win the overall competition.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
In 2016.
And what were some of the things that separated you? The design?
It was the complexity, design for sure.
Yeah.
So a big thing, the way that my passion is designing decks.
Yeah.
And I always took it first and foremost the functionality of it. Not how pretty I can make it, but how well can we use the space. And that was probably a very distinct difference between us as a company and other deck companies that were trying to just build big fancy decks. Functionality was number one. Everything had a place and a purpose. Sizes mattered. There was no wasted space on a deck. And so once we kind of laid out that part of the deck, and then we added flair to it. Now, what can we add to this deck that no one else can? Because that helps set us apart. And we would have lots of clients being like, love our design, and being like, you know what, I think I can get this job done cheaper. And they go out to other contractors, and no other contractor can build it. Because we would have curves in it. Yeah. We would have, we were bending wood that was unheard of at the time. We invested in some equipment that could heat up composite boards so we could manipulate them and get in some pretty interesting stuff. At one point, we had probably like 4 or 5 different deck suppliers and deck companies throughout Ontario hiring us just to bend boards for them.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have the equipment or the knowledge to do so.
And there's a couple phases. There's a couple, I think, things that you guys did with materials that were innovative in terms of just what people weren't doing at the time. So you ended up having curved boards were one, certainly, but I remember days of building 3 and 4 season rooms, and instead of siding them and siding, using composite boards and ripping them down manually to create like a shiplap siding for a 3-season structure, which would mean that effectively your 3-season structure could complement the aesthetics of the deck and the deck boards that you were using. Things like that were definitely innovative at the time. Right. Bending boards now seems like everybody can do it and everybody has done it, but at the time, I mean, it was so far removed from like what people knew how to do. And if they were bending things or creating circular structures, they weren't structural in any capacity, right? There would be a false overhang of boards to create that circle look rather than an actual structural built out of a deck frame.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that you guys did that were a little bit different, I think, at the time from what other deck builders were doing.
Yeah, and well, it definitely helped to stand apart, but that's like the technical side of the business.
Yeah.
More on the like I guess emotional side of the business, you could say, is we definitely had a passion for like impressing our clients. We wanted to make our clients happy, like to our core. I remember when I worked in the earlier days in other landscaping companies, I remember my boss would leave for the day and leave me on a job site. And I'm like, I'm going to do so much work. I'm going to do this so well that he's going to be impressed when he gets back. And that was like my drive. My drive was impressing him. And so now that's kind of transitioned into our bosses now are all our clients. And our focus is to make sure that, they are having a good experience and we're impressing them. And that was pretty paramount back when we were building decks. Even though we're outside, we don't see people all day. When they came home from work that day, we wanted to make sure that they were like, wow, you guys did a really good job, and wow, the yard is really clean, and you've answered all my questions. That was a part of the business that we, made us feel warm and fuzzy inside.
Right. And what are some of those, what are some of the ways that you try and impress them?
Well, back in the early days, it was very, very fundamental. Like, clean up the yard.
Yeah.
We're working in people's backyards.
Yeah.
Let's just clean it up. Let's not leave piles of wood everywhere and leave tools out.
Sure.
Clean up the yard was number one. It was the easiest thing to do. It only took 15 minutes at the end of the day. And that was probably the number one feedback we got from people. Is like, oh, wow, look how clean the backyard is. There's not piles of sawdust everywhere. There's not lumber strewn all across the yard. And, there's a practical reason for it, too. We used to stack the lumber really neatly because we don't want it to warp. And we'd be fighting with it the next day. So there's practical reasons to do it, too. But customers would be like, wow, that's impressive.
Right.
So to continue, I guess to continue the evolution there.
Yeah.
So 2015 was pretty much our pinnacle of deck building.
Right.
We were up to 17 employees in 2015. And we because the company was getting bigger and we were getting more established and we're getting, better talent of employees that like what we're doing, it was very important to figure out how we can make this year round. Because there's a lot of challenges coming with seasonal business. And when we had to shut down in winter time, quite often we would lose guys. Not many people can, go on EI all winter. So we brainstormed for a couple of years on how to transition to a year-round business. We tried a few different things. We tried to get into solariums, building four-season rooms. We tried snow plowing. And eventually, the most natural transition was renovations, because throughout these years, when everyone got laid off, we'd have a couple of clients that enjoyed working with us, and they'd be like, I need some work done on my house. Do you mind, Ben and Greg, do you mind coming and doing this for us? And we're like, yeah, sure. But it didn't click being like, that could be another business stream.
Right.
It wasn't until 2016 that half of our guys came from renovation background, building decks, and we're getting asked more and more for interior renovations that we decided to make that a bigger part of our business. And that's when we rebranded from Paradisiac Custom Decks Landscaping to Paradisaic Building Group. Because it's hard for people to look at a deck company and be like, I want to get my kitchen done.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't a natural thought, and it was hard. It was a hard sell against. Trying to convince people that no, we do renovations, and they're like, all your trucks say decks, your shirt says decks. Like, that was hard. So we had to completely rebrand to help try to change that mindset, and we started working with a couple of existing clients that we had. We kept in touch with all of our clients, which was a big part of our relationship building. So we let them all know that we're doing renovations now, and we had a couple of designers that wanted to work with us, and we literally we didn't change how we were doing anything. We just changed what we were doing. All the same employees, all the same values and metrics. We just transitioned from decks to interior renovations. And we got such a good response from decks. We had people that enjoyed working with us so much. It was easy to get them to be for them to pass along word of mouth about the experience of working with us. Not so much what we did, but how we did it.
Sure.
And that went a long way, and that really helped bridge that gap between interior and exterior.
Cool. And so now where are we in the timeline there? So it's 2016 now,
So
all the way through
yeah,
to
in
2020?
in 2016, about 95% of our revenue was from decks, and only about 5% was from interior renovations. Fast forward to 2018, 2 years later, 87% of our revenue was from interior renovations, and the remainder was from decks and like miscellaneous projects. So we did a huge company shift. We changed a lot of systems because a big fundamental that we discovered was it's a lot different working outside someone's home and working inside someone's home. It's much more personal. It's much more intimate.
Yeah.
And you can't have guys with their shirts off and swearing and smoking butts. You cannot have that in people's homes. Not that our guys did that anyways outside, but
No, but I mean, it's the point's well taken, right? The idea is that if you, things that we, I think of or take for granted now were things like the t-shirt, right? Like at least when I came, I was like 17, 18 years old, and I had never seen a construction crew in my life up to that point for cash working otherwise anywhere in my whole life that had like uniformed shirts.
Right.
And these aren't, we're not talking like polo shirts that are like well-tailored, just like regular t-shirts that were the same color. Like that seemed like an innovation at the time, and it seems absurd now to think of it that way, that it's it, but that was it. But outside, that was really all you could control and all you could do, right? Was clean the yard up and dress, in some fashion professionally, right?
One of the companies that I worked for years and years ago, they're not in business anymore, but they were huge in branding. They had all of their trucks color coded, all their shirts color coded, all their tools color coded, and I was very impressionable. I was like 17, and I'm like, man, this guy looks professional, and so I learned a lot from him. And so when I started my business, I painted all of our shovels the same color. I spray painted all of our tools. We didn't have any money, so we just went and bought the same colored shirts because I didn't want people to look outside and see random people working in their backyard. I wanted everyone to have the same color shirt on, just because that optics of professionalism goes a long way.
Yeah.
Huge. And that was like from day one we were big into that professional look. It goes a long way with helping people.
And more than just the look, too. Not just. I don't think it was always like the aesthetics. The other part is that there's a degree of. I mean, construction's always got an aspect of this, right? Like construction is about, to some degree, like crew solidarity and people understanding kind of like the crews that they're working with and being kind of in tune with one another to some degree. I think uniforms did that to some degree, right? They're like, it's the difference between like a bunch of kids running around in a field and they're like 5-6 years old and they're like, I kind of play soccer on the weekends, versus like you going out, spend $200-$300 and give them all uniforms and put them on their backs and they're like, wow, man, like wow, like we're a team now. And there's something different about that, right? Like that's what at least the way that I saw the whole uniform and shirt thing, and the same thing's carried through. Like that's why I think every one of the employees and everybody that we work with all buy into these systems. They all, like, really, it's super strange because like I say, I've worked in a bunch of different construction environments, and there's never been a case where so many people in a company buy into the same value pitch, right? Like never. You're always going to get some guy that's kind of like, it is what it is. It's construction, whatever, and kind of walk away. It's just not the case. Every single person kind of agrees to one degree or another. I think some of that's you building in like solidarity through things like uniforms and team building and things like that. And some of it's just, I think that for the most part we have a vision. I think Ben's depiction of, let's say, that trajectory, right? You take that trajectory and say from 1999 to what have you. Like it's one thing to say that we switched along those lines, but it's another thing to say, at least the way that I always saw it, was that like we're a deck company, and then people would say, well, I want some landscaping. And I think at that time, and still people to this day, there are companies, and we hear this from clients a lot, where they say, I said I wanted landscaping, but they tried to convince me of doing a deck, right? Or I wanted a deck and they tried to convince me to do landscaping. And our, I think, answer has always been kind of like client directed, right? That is that if the clients, want landscaping, our, let's say, fiduciary responsibility there tends to be something more technical. It's like, hey, landscaping's really great, but you have a huge, elevation drop. We don't want water and freezing and thaw and heave to impact that. You might consider a deck out here, but it's completely up to you. And I think that openness to like client directed business and client directed projects, that's to me what it looked like bouncing back and forth between the deck and the landscaping, then moving, into renovations was kind of the same thing. People were like, hey, you just did my deck. Can you do the back door? It's, connected to the deck ostensibly. Hey, you just did the back door. What about the tile that's sitting inside my kitchen floor? Sure. And it kind of, fed out and fed out and fed out. And I think that's part of it. And that's why now when we do our sit downs with clients and we talk to them, most of what we're doing is asking them. I mean, it's no different than asking them how they use their deck, right? The questions that I used to ask, and I got this a lot from clients, was we've never heard anybody ask these questions before. Was like, hey, Mitch, like, how do you live? How does your family live? Like, what do you guys do? Are you the kinds of people that just want to have like coffee on the back deck, or do you want to like have family and friends over and like entertain? Do you want to have a separate area for entertaining versus where the kids hang out? Like that, those kinds of questions are still part of the renovation stuff that we do, right? Very much part of the renovation stuff we do, but they've never really changed since day one. It was, hey, do you want landscaping? No, I want a deck. Okay, why? Have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Okay, great. Let's kind of build some kind of relationship and rapport to see what works best for you, kind of thing. I think that's as well. Like it seems like that's what
that client directive
people like.
is been huge, and we took that straight out of right from our deck days into renovations. Yeah. We noticed that that with the flux of designers out there, and we experienced this in the deck world. There was some big deck designers out at the time, and we got a lot of feedback from clients being like, he didn't listen to my ideas. I asked for this, and he brought me this because he said it was cool and stuff like that. And that kind of like, didn't bother us, but I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you do what the customer asked you to do? Like that made zero sense to us. Like, why is it our agenda when you're the one hiring us? So when we got into renovations, it was that exact same like mindset, being like, what would you like us to do? And if they want ideas, we'll help them with ideas, but never would we be like, you should be doing this. Never. That wasn't even in our vocabulary at the time. And a lot of people responded well to that because then we work with them. It's like a it's co-developed. They feel part of it, and we're essentially just trying to solve whatever it is that they're asking us to solve. It's not a pitch in any means. It's not it's not salesy. There's no.
And do you find that in the industry that there's other people that are really just trying to push their own kind of vision for the project or their own agenda, or just trying to sell them something?
I'm sure that is probably in any industry. In ours, when design is involved, there's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of subjectivity and stuff like that. And a lot of designers, they want to make a name for themselves, and they have a certain style. And a lot of people love that style, and that's why they hire that designer. I love that style. I want that. I resonate with that. It's intimate. I resonate with that. That's what I want. And these designers, play a very functional role in producing a lot of renovation projects. But there's a fine line between pushing what they want and agreeing to what the customer wants.
Right.
And we have come into some crossroads with that. We've always taken a stance of we were going to do what the customer wants, and it's fared well for us. You can probably elaborate on that a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's never. I mean, are there? So if the question is, are there people out there doing that? I mean, I have to assume yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't interact with them a lot because we interact with clients. What we hear is the tail end of that I was frustrated by that process. And so I assume, yes, if they're frustrated by it, that it exists out there. I think the reality with working with people should be, as with anything in like a consumer based and like free market, right? Like, yeah, I like, Eddie Bauer clothes. Great. But like, I'm not restricted to only Eddie Bauer clothes. Sure. Like I can go to Walmart if I want and buy George brand clothing. Yeah. Right. Like that seems important. It seemed important in a renovation. It seemed even more important in the renovation context. It's not something transitory like clothing that you can just throw off. This is like, I'm going to build my home around this kind of ideology. It seemed weird for us to ever have anybody dictating what that is. Now, there's fine lines with like where let's say our responsibilities and maybe a designer or an architect or an engineer's stops, but there's also a limit to kind of like where do we stop with regard to design things. I mean, I try to as clearly as I can talk to clients a lot of the time about like, hey, do you want a designer? They have all these merits that are really, really good if that's what you need. And some people will be hardline like, yes, we have to have a designer. Great, then a designer's for you. Or a hard line like, no, I don't want a designer. Okay, then a designer's not for you. And then things kind of fall on our plate, but we have to be careful. I think the biggest thing is the same thing. I sympathize with designers very quickly because it is easy to slip into like, I have 15, 20 years experience doing this thing, and so I know how to do it better, or I know what will look good in the end. We've often found, I think, that foremen are the best people situated to deal with those little bits of nuance, right? Like you set out a project and you say, okay, how is this exactly going to finish out? We can plan all we want, but once it's in practice and you're looking at it, oftentimes, the guy who has 20 years experience, doing that very thing is going to have a lot more thought to be able to kind of deliver you, hey, here are 4 or 5 different options. Here's what they're going to look like. I've done this several times in the past. This has looked really nice. I think it might complement the cabinetry, whatever. But we also, I think we're all careful to say, like, we're not designers. Just like we're careful to say, like, we're not structural engineers, right? That's why we want you to get structural engineering documents done.
Right.
We want you to get design elements done. But if you don't have them, we can work with you on it as well and you know, customize it to you guys.
Yeah, yeah. And what would you say is like the like for Paradisaic Building Group is like what are some of the values that you guys have as a company?
Well, they're right from the get-go. It would be simply probably integrity.
Yeah.
Would be the starting point. Is that when back in the early days when I'm building a project for someone, I didn't price it right, or I need to buy a bunch more lumber. I would never ever surprise the customer with a bill and hash it out with them. I always had that internal being like, this is on me. I need to just do better next time. So having that integrity, or if you're going to show up when you say you're going to show up, then show up. That was huge. I was well aware of the industry because I worked in it and worked for other companies. And our boss in the morning would be like, oh, we can't go to this site today. Go to this site. I'm like, aren't they expecting us? He's like, oh, I'll call them later. And I saw that. And then, as I got older, I started hearing it more from homeowners. That's a challenge, not knowing if contractor's going to show up next day. Because they spread themselves too thin.
Right.
So right from the get-go is that having that integrity was massive. That's probably the underlying value. The next thing to that would be professionalism. We're in an industry that struggles with professionalism, and we started off our company with trying to have that professional image, and then expanded on it with having professional processes and services, and having a team that buys into those values and resonates with those values and mirrors those values is huge. There's no way of our success without it.
And how do you get them to buy into that? Like why are they motivated to?
Yeah, higher character over skill.
Cool. And how has that changed over the years? Has it been from day one? Like from the deck company?
We've gone through a lot of employees through the years. We've done a lot. So this is what you see.
But these values, they, it sounds like they've been pretty consistent through that evolution of the business.
I don't think, Rich, you might be able to speak to this, if we've ever done wrong by a homeowner, ever.
No, I mean, at least, so if the question is why are our clients resonating with that or buying into it, I would say that it, to me, from my stance, at least in talking to them at an estimation level and a project planning level, it seems to be something akin to transparency and kind of openness. That seems to be it. And the funny thing is, I think that's what probably undergirds the solidarity that adheres between all the employees of the company as well, right? That I think all of us, so if you're a foreman, let's say, you don't want a sales guy to be like a yes man, right? You don't want them to just go out and be like, yes, promise everything in the world, we can do everything, price doesn't matter, approach doesn't matter, practical, applicability doesn't matter, let's go. Then your foreman's left in a position where they have to build something that's impossible, and they have to navigate a very strange expectation versus reality terrain with the client. And the client seems similarly duped, right? They're like, we were told about this, we were almost sold into this flowery pitch of yes, everything can happen. So I think part of it comes down, some of it, I've often joked with clients that some of it comes down to saying no, right? Hey, can we do this? No, that's not practical. Here's why, and here are the technical limitations of that. But we can suss out some other solutions to this. And I think that's probably both what the employees are buying into, at least I do as an employee, I can speak at volume about why, ideologically I'm here, and it probably aligns with the values of the company to some degree. And I assume the reason that I'm still here is probably because I align with the company to some degree. But I think that feeds into clients and employees, right? Everybody looks around and they're like, okay, we all have an open, interactive, honest, transparent version of what we're doing here. There's no need for a foreman on a site to act strange when you say, Mitch, you're like, what's my plumbing bill look like? And the foreman's like, I don't know. And he shuffles some papers away and he's like, let me go ask my boss.
Right.
It's right there on the page and we can all talk about it. And it's not offensive to work in, a company that makes money any more than it's, offensive for the homeowner to do their job and work, right? So there shouldn't be any trepidation that way. It should just be transparent, open, honest. I think that probably undergirds, honestly, everything.
Transparency is huge. Back to not having our own agenda and not trying to push a particular product or a particular subcontractor. We really will give the options to the homeowner and let them choose. And I think having that not having that behind the scenes agenda helps with the buy-in from the employees. Rich now can feel confident knowing that we're not just trying to shuffle something along because we get a kickback in the end.
Sure.
We're going to genuinely do what the homeowner wants and use the product that the homeowner wants.
Right.
And so that's along with the transparency, and the homeowners would never even see that type of transparency, but that is something that is a big value.
I use the word like fiduciary a lot. Like I really think that's, it comes from, I would say most people kind of interact with that term or that concept in like a financial, environment or something like that. And there's an intention there that like, I think that part of making contracting better is, evolving it to a level that includes things like concepts like fiduciary responsibility. And so when I talk to clients, I'm like, the idea here is that there should be trust, and probably an equal amount of trust as you are putting in any financial advisor, by virtue of the fact that we're dealing with large sums of money and very personal investments that are going to impact like your life, your lifestyle, and your family going forward. So like I think that same thing matters, right? So when I talk about fiduciary responsibility with clients, I talk about it in here's what we're here to do. I'm earnest or honest enough to say what we can't do or we don't know how to do. And I think people like that. And just getting back to them, I mean, we still hear to this day, like, oh, Rich, you're the first contractor to like 7 that visited us and talked to us that came back and gave us a quote. And I'm like, that is just an astounding concept. Like I think everybody's experienced that. I've experienced that with things that we don't do in company that I've asked for quotes for, right? It's a very strange process, but that's part of that same transparency thing, right? Like if I tell you I'm going to give you a quote and we're going to give you a quote and it's going to look like this, then that's what it's going to look like.
I've been hearing that for 20 years. It blows my mind when you go and see someone and they're like, yeah, I called 3 people and you really want to call me back.
Insane.
I've been hearing that for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I get it. Like contractors get busy.
Yeah.
And a lot of contractors are, they're technicians. They can do the work really well, but when it comes to managing their time, managing client expectations, that's a whole other ballgame. Yeah. And so there's the evolution of that is why this industry has the stigmatism it does have. But at least I guess we started maybe in a generation that wasn't, I don't know how to word this, not through like the 70s and 80s where when people got laid off from factories and they started their own contracting business, they were still the same ethical, like they had the same level of work ethic in a factory that they took into work in people's homes. So they would be drinking beer at lunch, smoking butts in their, in their front hallway, like stuff like that. And so we were at the later part of that generation, starting with kind of like a new outlook at it, where we recognize the professionalism in that stance is very, very important. But a big thing, just so we could add some clips to this, is the client center focus. Is probably what our business revolves around, and that can mean many, many different things. First and foremost is that when we meet with people, we're telling them we're starting off a new relationship here, and we need to make sure that we start off on the right foot. We'll have clients sometimes email us and be like, "Oh, can you get me a quote on this?" Just a random email. Send us a drawing. Can you get us a quote on this? And we're like, that's not how we work. We don't know. You don't know who we are. We don't know who you are. This is a two-way street. And if we're going to partner with you, we want to make sure that we're meeting all of your needs, all of your family's needs, and we are achieving exactly what you're looking for. And we can't do that through one email where we've never even met you.
Sure.
So for that reason, we don't do like RFQs. We don't do bid work and stuff like that. Our ideal client is the ones that are looking for a partner, a renovation partner.
Cool. So I mean, you touched on like being professional, having integrity, working ethically, being transparent. Like, how has those values shaped the business to what it is today and where it's going?
Well, it's all those underlying values that are, in fact, in our mission statement as well. It's something that when we do our regular staff meetings, everyone is on the same page with, and having that strong foundation of a group, like a team of employees that all feel the same way and want to achieve the same thing, literally sets the foundation for scaling however we want to. Right now, we have unofficially about 5 crews on the road and 12 employees, and I think it's safe to say that everyone would agree with what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to do for our homeowners. And that is, now that we have this good base of a team, whenever new people come in, we have a new carpenter starting in 2 weeks. They're going to be being submersed into a culture that's already existing, and they'll easily assimilate, or if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out.
And even co-op students, I mean, bringing co-op students in from the trade school and things like that, it's kind of setting this foundation for like, there is kind of, I mean, I think part of the reason why the employees do it is the same reason the clients do it. That is trust, is that they're brought into the same conversation that the client is, right? Like, hey, do you want to renovate your kitchen? I mean, most of our clients, my goal would be like at the end of the quote process, you understand what we're doing as equally as we do to some degree, perhaps not execution wise, but at least in concept. And I think that when you have meetings with, let's say, a team meeting about what do we think about the quote process and what do we think about how we're doing this, I think a lot of companies, especially corporately structured companies, would think of it more in terms of like, okay, this is an office issue that the administrative people are going to talk about, and then the crews are just going to fall in line kind of thing. Whereas for us, it's much more like, hey guys, what's working for you on site in terms of the scopes and talking to clients, and what's working for you guys in terms of the scopes, and what's not working for you guys in terms of scopes to both parties. And then how do we find a middle ground between those? Because ultimately, like, the scope is this, central contract that the homeowner and the foreman on site are going to hold together and execute. So it's also, I think, just the idea. I mean, people talk about this in like behavioral psychology all the time. When you're like, if you just ask somebody their opinion, a lot of the time, like immediately defenses go down and people start to talk, right? If you're like, that's a really good idea, Mitch, can you tell me more about that? That invitation with an employee is hugely different than like a corporate, hierarchical structure that's like, you're going to follow my plan kind of thing. And I think that's part of it, is that we ask questions, we open the floor up to everybody to be able to have input, and then we, adapt based on that input. Right?
Very good. So Rich, like you deal a little bit more with the clients, you're doing more of the estimates. How does one go about hiring a contractor?
What's important about to think about, I guess, when hiring a contractor? I mean, we've gone over this maybe a dozen or so times, and I guess in the history of the company, right? Like what markers you might look for, what metrics you might look for, what are the things you could use. And I think the old school methodology were things like, go on the Better Business Bureau, see which one doesn't have ticks against it, and that's your guy that you call out and potentially get a quote from. I think our world is a little bit different now. The consumer base is shifting and changing. They're more like my generation, our generation in general, people that are a little bit more, let's say, critical and a little bit less personally interactive. They want to kind of shop around, have multiple options, do X, Y, and Z. I think what we've come down to, at least our process, we call it a CPA, a comprehensive project assessment. You have to start using acronyms when you incorporate. That's important, I guess. But the important part of the CPA, to my mind, grows out of, I guess, we talked about this with my mom when she did a renovation and it didn't go that well, and she asked us kind of, how do you guys kind of suss out what good contractors versus bad contractors are? And the first things I usually tell clients, and I told my mom, was like, I don't think you should try to think about it in terms of good and bad contractors. I think you should try to think about it in terms of like services that do or don't work for you. We touched on guys that might not have the same professionalism that you're after. Number one, there's a market for people that don't have that professionalism. So, they can coexist in an ecosystem, and the people that want more professionalism can get that. The other thing that's true is that the contractors that, let's say, don't have that, I think it's to some degree fair they don't. They spend their time swinging hammers, not building budgets or not looking at like regression analyses for how job costing works and things like that. And I'm like, why would you ever expect that person has that skill set? I mean, take a hammer, I come from an academic and a construction background. Put a hammer in the hands of an academic, tell them to swing it for 7 hours, and tell me if they're doing it well at the end of that day. Like, they're not. They have a very sore elbow kind of thing. But nobody would ever expect that they can do that well. The implicit expectation seems to be that every construction person is going to be the professional business person that people are expecting on site. And that's just not the case. So the first thing is, I think, stop thinking about people as these discrete entities that are good or bad. Start thinking about people that can fulfill, needs better or worse. The second thing that we talk about is the CPA and what undergirds it. And generally it's, in a simplified form, it's get a design or a plan done. It doesn't have to mean like the world's most, powerfully rendered, ray traced, 3D, pictures and things like that, but at least needs to be dimensional. We live in 2019, graph paper and napkin quotes that don't really depict dimensions or numbers seem to be strange nowadays. So have a plan, have something to kind of guide you. Out of that plan can grow a scope. Scopes, I would argue, and I'm probably a little bit biased because I build them and do estimation, but a scope, to my mind, is A, only something you can generate after a design's done, and then B, it's something that should ideally incorporate what is being done and what's not being done. So the scope, instead of having, let's say, as a counterexample, what I usually pejoratively refer to as napkin quotes, this kind of idea of like, hey, bathroom with shower, with toilet, with sink, $20,000, something like that. It's okay, but the problem with it is it leaves there's so much ambiguity in there that debates are going to happen. And I think, again, fairly, it's not like, oh, this contractor is malicious and he's trying to do something, untoward, or this client is being unreasonable. It's more like, no, you guys didn't spell out the nature of your relationship clearly enough, and now you're having debates over it. Much of that can be easily tackled with a scope, right? Is the disposal fees included? I didn't include them right now, Mitch. Do you want me to include them? Yes, include them. Great. I'm going to write that here in the scope. Disposal fees are included, and it's going to be reflected in the price. So the scope is the second thing. And then real pricing. Look for contractors, I would say, that want to do designs, want to interact on a design level, want to build scopes and have detailed interactions with people so that there's nothing left out, unknown. And then pricing. Pricing has to be, in my mind, as it should be for every business. Doesn't matter what the business is, it should be quantifiable and it should be measured. It shouldn't just be a guess, and it shouldn't just be, estimation is probably a bad word for what we do when we talk about number generation. What we're doing is we're adding together every material that you need, making very long, extensive material lists, looking at the labor hours that we're deriving from past projects and saying, okay, on average, it takes these 5 foremen X number of hours to lay X number of material, and then we're going to compute it backwards through, and we're going to say, hopefully that average flattens out any discrepancies, high lows, differences in talent between different foremen, things like that, and we get an accurate number of hours. Hours plus materials plus overhead and profit is what price should be derived from, not some arbitrary, materials times 3 or something like that. Or, hey, we're selling a really nice material like composite decking instead of pressure treated, so materials times 4 because it's a prestige buy or something like that. That seems dishonest, right? The idea is that you should be paying for whatever the material costs, and you should be paying for whatever the labor costs. Composite and pressure treated are a hilarious example of that, because labor goes down on composite because it's much faster to lay than pressure treated boards, right? You're pneumatically putting in things with a gun rather than 2 screws every joist forever. So theoretically, when you're building a price for that, it should be less labor than it, but the material cost should go up. And so I think that those 3 things: have a design, have that design feed a scope, a detailed scope that doesn't leave anything open for question or debate, and then have pricing that works off that scope, that is a real materialist-driven, labor cost-driven product rather than just a guess kind of thing. And I think with those 3 things, you get a good part of the way to confidence in any contractor. And so you could just say to somebody, look for those 3 things. And if a contractor is, think about it in practice. Hey, Rich, can I get a quote on a bathroom? Sure. I'd really like a design of some kind. And I say, no, we don't really like to work off designs. We'll just kind of give you a price. I mean, that should be somewhat of a red flag, right? How do you know what you're building? How do you know how many square feet of flooring? How do you know what that flooring has to be cut around? How do you know, any number of the things about that particular project? You don't. Same with scopes. I don't really want to draw up a scope. I just want to give you a price. That seems too simplistic, especially when we're talking about, I don't know, funny thing is, when I first started working for Ben, I was fairly young, so I had no concept really of money. I don't come from a huge money background, but the values that we're talking about looked like my year's earnings for deposits, right? And so it struck me pretty quickly, especially once I bought a house, that these are really big sums. Even small projects that we do, very small projects that we do, are huge sums of money for just average everyday people, which is what most of our clients are. They're just regular people like I am. And so I would think that fiduciary thing comes back into the picture, and you say, I have a responsibility to people to treat this money right, and part of what we see as treating that money responsibly is having a plan for it. That's kind of the whole wraparound of it. So I think a plan that includes a design, a scope, and real legitimate pricing, mixed with transparency and honesty, is how you should look for a contractor. Those 4 or 5 things, right? And hopefully working together.
Cool.
So I'm actually going to just kind of give my take on the same kind of premise on how to hire a contractor. Essentially, homeowners want to minimize the risk.
Yep.
You're rolling the dice at some point, but you want to minimize that. So first thing, if you're looking at getting a project done, ask around. Talk to friends and family. Look online. Look for reviews. Look for someone who's established and reputable, who's active. Those are probably that's the first thing. Call them out and meet with them. And at some point you have to go with your gut feeling. Look for red flags, because if they show up late or they don't come when the appointment's supposed to be, how do you think it's going to be when you hand them $50,000 to do your kitchen?
Yeah.
So look red flags, go with your gut, and never want to sign a contract or hire someone without a plan in place. A one-page document that says one line kitchen renovation is not acceptable. But yeah, you never want to hire someone without knowing exactly what you're getting. And that's why we take on the premise of developing a design, writing a scope. The scope is a story that tells of what the project is. Steps 1 through 1,000, everything we're doing and what we're not doing, so they know exactly what they're paying for. You don't want to, like, back before we started doing the CPA process, as contractors, we'd get busy. We'd work all day, and then we would find ourselves visiting clients and doing quotes in the evening. And what happens when, after a long day's worth of work, you're tired, you have a stack of quotes, and you start going through them, and maybe you go through them a little bit quicker than you should. And you can honestly forget some things, or leave something out that you didn't think of, or go through it a little too quickly. And what happens is the homeowner gets it, they're like, okay, I like what I see, and they hire them. Well, halfway through the project, that's when the conversations start happening. I thought your guys were going to be changing these doors, for example. And the contractor would be like, oh, well, I didn't have it in the quote. I didn't know we talked about that. And the homeowner's like, yes, we did. That's going to be extra cost now. That's when the wheels start coming off. And that's when homeowners start getting surprise bills. And a contractor, if they run into a situation, they're going to do one of two things. They're either going to invoice the homeowner for the additional costs, or they're going to compromise other parts of the project to make up for that cost.
Right.
And that's not a situation homeowners or contractors want to be in. So we took a step back, and we came with the position that we need to plan this out properly. We are not going to take your money until you know exactly what's involved in your project and you understand all the pieces, and you're comfortable with it.
Okay, cool. No, that's let's go back to talk on battery or card. Card? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can talk about this. So let's go back to talking about like the homeowners. What are some of the things that they're facing regarding like style, design, space, some of the needs that you guys would kind of flush out in your preliminary discussion with them?
Well, I guess first and foremost, here in Durham region, we're not like downtown Toronto with century homes all over the place. We have pockets of them, but most homes out here are built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And the construction style at that time was separate kitchen, separate living room, separate dining room, small bedrooms. Every room had its purpose and its place. We find with a lot of people now, people are entertaining a lot more. People are having family over a lot more. Holiday dinners are becoming more and more popular. Well, they've always been popular, but there's more of a sense of gathering in homes for people, and predominantly gathering in the kitchen. And the number one functionality complaint we get of people living in their existing homes is, I'm in the kitchen working, I have my back to everyone, and they're all in the other room. I'm not part of the conversation. People come in and out. There's a disconnect when we have our family over. So I would say that functionality is the number one thing that homeowners are coming across as an issue in their current home. And you have two choices. Find another home, move, or renovate the one that you have. And a lot of people are choosing to look at a new floor plan for their house to make it more functional to their lifestyle.
And then where do you see the industry heading?
So right now, open concepts is still a big trend right now of taking down walls, having a family gathered in one central room. But I see a big trend coming up is aging in place. We have a lot of older community members that don't necessarily want to move into an apartment or a condo. They have their roots where they are, and they want to look at how they can improve their home so that they can age in place. So that means doing barrier-free bathrooms, main floor concepts where they can have their master bedroom on the main floor. Lots of different things where they can see themselves after retirement spending the next 25 years in their home comfortably.
Which, comes down to, I think, changing trends just in the way people live. Like you said, the family thing. I mean, I'm sure for a lot of us, like, when I was a kid and when like family dinners happened, right, like children were better seen and not heard, and we kind of had a different room you were in, and then you'd come into the place to eat and kind of leave. I think that you saw, parental roles and the way that cooking and prepping meals like used to happen is definitely not the case anymore, where you had very bifurcated or separate kind of, entities for that you would have people socializing in one room while one person was prepping all the time. And I think that's changed, that you have a kind of more shared responsibility in that sense, as well as a kind of more interactive. That's the whole open concept feeds into that, right? That like, yes, like I'm cooking and I'm prepping, but like, so too is my partner, and then so too are we entertaining at the same time, and so too are the kids running around, and so too are. So I think that's a big, just the cultural change of like how people operate in their houses for sure has altered. And I think that probably, what were you saying? The last thing you said was aging in place. I mean, that's I have, I guess, some personal interaction with that. My grandma moved into my mom's house, for example, and I think that's a changing thing as well. Previously it used to kind of always be the case that the sandwich generation, right? That generation kind of occupies now, where they have kids at home, they have parents at home. There's care going both ways. So for us, yeah, I mean, changing to that. And so that's just about listening to the clients as well, right? Like for my grandma, she moved into a house, she said, into my mom's house, and she said, like the big impediment to moving into the house is feeling comfortable in there, right? That I'm leaving a place that I've been for like 40, 50 years. How do I feel comfortable in here? That's like a new, hey, what can we do for you? Okay, well, these are the problematics that matter to me. So what did we do? Yeah, we renovated a bathroom and we made it accessible, curbless. We made it kind of more functional for her that way. Benches, seating, hand pulls, stuff like that. The standard, I would say, stuff. But with the concept of like aging in place, it wasn't just that I want this bathroom to be functional for me. It was that, can you guys mimic the bathroom that I have in my condo that I've lived with for 45 years, so that when I live here in my 80s and 90s, I feel more comfortable or more at home, right? Like that's also a trend that you're seeing. That was probably never the case. You never probably had parents taking in parents, right?
Yeah.
Generations taking in generations to live with them for long periods of time.
We're actually we're actually seeing that quite a bit.
Yeah.
A lot of homeowners are having their parents move in with them because they're getting older. They need the care. We're building apartments above lofts. We're doing in-law suites. We're renovating main floors for parents to live in. There's quite a bit of that right now, of these generations moving in with each other. Because the alternative, I don't think going to an old folks' home is ideal, nor inexpensive. So a lot of people here in Durham region are inviting their parents to live with them. And we're renovating a lot of homes to accommodate a separate area, so they have their independence, but they're under the care of the family.
Yeah.
And sometimes we see that as a source of tension too, with regard to like design / otherwise as well. Like I'm finding that a lot of the time people are like, in an ideal world, I would love to be able to say, okay, I've got a designer, they're going to design this exactly the way that you want, and we're going to have all the bells and whistles of like the modern renovations, and we're going to have all these custom things done. It's going to look really great. But budget quickly becomes a reality, and so they have to choose. And it seems to us, at least, to be maybe a shame that people have to make that choice, right? It's either, I either have to have a renovation that looks good in my mind, or one that facilitates like my aging parents living in the house. That seems like almost an unfair like situation to be put in, kind of thing, especially with an investment vehicle like your home. So I think part of as well being able to have that discussion with people as these trends change and as these cultural trends change, that like there's no touch room in the house anymore. Like I used to have one of those like china and like porcelain horses like in a glass case.
Don't send furniture.
I'm like, what do we do in there? My mom's like, you do nothing. You don't go in there. I'm like, perfect. It makes no sense. We don't use it for anything. What is it? And those places are opened up to more family-oriented activities and things like that.
Sure,
so,
yeah.
I mean, I don't think my wife and I have ever even like eaten at a dinner table in our house. Like we like eat on the couches and like downstairs. and stuff. So I mean, people have changed quite a bit, and so I think listening to people, it all comes back to that, like just having an open, transparent compass. What's going on in your life? What are you doing? How can we solve this? And if there is a tension between something like, I really want it to look really, really good, but I also need all these bells and whistles, maybe I can't afford the designer right now, but maybe I can rely on your guys' expertise, which is not interior designers. We're not that, but we have enough experience, I think, to say if you're caught between a rock and a hard place, and so too the other direction. If you don't think that you can afford the bells and whistles, but you want the design elements inside of there, great. Like do those things. Whatever works for you works for us, right? So yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. So it seems like there's been a lot of change, like obviously in trends in the homes here in Durham region, as well as the generation that you guys are serving. How do you guys keep up with technology and methods and things of that nature to better serve?
I think the biggest thing is we're young. No, seriously. I mean, it sounds like an easy, quick, flippant response. But like, I think that's a part of it, right? That we don't have, and I've been in many construction situations where you're like, here's an iPad we're going to track something on, and like everybody at the company kind of like yields back and is like, iPod, like I don't, they're generationally just different. And so I think a big part of it is that we adapt really quickly because we're living that adaptation at the same time, right? Like, yes, we're not the sandwich generation, let's say, but like our parents are. And so like, that's a lived experience of mine. That's something that I know very intimately, and I know the stresses of, and I know the problems that come along with it. So when somebody asks me about that, I'm like, hey man, like, this is what happened in my house. This is what happened in my family. Let's talk about kind of, what solutions we did there and what worked. So I think part of it is that we are closer to our clientele, probably like culturally, than most other construction generations have been. You often used to get, and I mean, still the hilarious campy like stereotypes about tradespeople exist, right? Like the plumber with like his crack showing or something like that, or these things don't make any sense anymore, and it's not what the world really looks like. Yeah. And so I think just a closeness, probably for me at least, a closeness to the clients.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. We're big on technology, and times are changing fast in every industry. Ours is no different. We're just we're very sincere about making sure that we have the best methods, we're using the best materials, and we're giving the best service. And we can't do that without technology. All of the apps that we use, all the programs we use for all the systems we use are technology based. We do regular education stuff. We go down to the States every year and go to trade shows. All the new products usually come to the States before Canada sees it. We always like to keep our thumb on the pulse of new methods, new products, what's innovative out there, and just make sure that we're part of the new wave of how to do things, because construction has changed a lot, believe it or not, in 100 years. And we're renovating homes now in Durham region and have plaster on the walls, and there's just a different method. There's a better way of doing things nowadays, and we like to keep our thumb on that pulse to make sure that our customers are getting the most effective value for their dollar.
Yeah, right on. So Ben, if you can sum up the essence of Paradisaic and what's your why?
Well, I would say it is essentially we want to be a trustworthy solution for homeowners from all walks of life, from all sizes of homes, from all different backgrounds. We see the landscape out there of the options for contractors that homeowners have, and all the different types of homeowners, big homes, small homes, condos. We know that homeowners are rolling the dice, and we take it upon ourselves to be a solid, trustworthy solution for everyone.
Amazing. What's the other one? Do the same thing, just pull that mic a little closer to you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
You're talking kind of across it. That's cool.
That's probably our why in one line is to be a trustworthy solution for everyone. Okay. And that obviously trickles down to many different facets of how we do that, or why why we do that.
Yeah. I won't waste the camera thing, but I think you're talking more about your mission.
I mean, I have a why that's probably different than Ben's why.
Your why is a little different. Like your why, it's different to everybody, but that sounds more of like your mission statement. The fact that you want to be.
Well, our mission.
What is your mission statement?
Our mission is to that we believe that we believe that contracting is more of a relationship than a business transaction.
Yeah.
And that we want to be professional and honest in all of our dealings with homeowners, and we think that contracting can be done differently. It can be done better. Mm-hmm. That's our mission.
Okay. Anything to touch on there, Rich? Seem like you're deep into thought.
No, I mean, I would say, yeah. I mean, done differently. I mean, I think the big things there tend to be, at least for me. So I can say, there's probably like a mission based, company wide what we're doing, and then there's probably like a why do I do what I'm doing, or
sure,
maybe a better way to attack this, or a better way to come at this might be like, why am I here in the first place? Like, why am I at Paradisaic rather than any other number of companies or any other industries or what have you? And I think probably the two twin factors are, on one hand, I think that I've seen enough. I come from a kind of weird mixed background where I have a very, let's say, uncultured home life and a very cultured home life in two different dimensions. I come from an academic walk of life for a very long time, and a construction walk of life that seem to be very different places. And it occurs to me that there are people that are doing this, I said earlier, not good or bad, but rather just have either different capacities, different solutions they can offer to people. And I have like an internal like why I am involved with this industry in the first place that surrounds this idea of making contracting better, not in the same way I think that Ben's talking about, which is important. It's better for clients in that way. I have a why, for me at least, that's better for contracting as an industry itself. I don't like where contracting is at as an industry, and I don't like where trades are at as an industry, and I don't like it from a number of dimensions, but predominantly from like the way it's received from people. So it burns me inside when somebody says to me, like, contractors are all like untrustworthy or something like that. Like, I want the response from people to be something more like, no, contractors, that's who you call when you need somebody that you trust to do something. And it's in line with what Ben does and what Ben wants for the company, I think. But for me, it's like even the opposite direction. Like, I think that it's absurd. This gets into pricing, right? We can talk about pricing through this, where, I think that it's a tragedy that contractors fight tooth and nail with each other predominantly more than with anything else over like a $40, $50, $60 an hour charge out rate when, like first year grads from a law program, are charged out by their lawyer, employers at like $400 or $500 an hour. And I'm like, again, it comes down to this pricing. When we build pricing for things, we're building in a meticulous, quantified fashion, right? This is what it takes to do these hours based on these averages from these number of jobs with this material. And that seems to be different than, just kind of pulling a number out of a hat. In the same way, I think that when you look at contractors, I look around at the people that we work with, and like, my job's easy, right? Like, at the end of the day, I take what people ask me to do, and then I just do it, and then I give it to foremen, and they make it a reality. And the funny thing is that, like, the foremen are the ones with 20 years experience. The foremen are the guys that have put like blood, sweat, and tears into every single project. They're the ones with the raw skill set, and yet they're the ones that are devalued the most in the grand scheme of the industries, right? You look at doctors, you look at these things. I think that we are in a period culturally where trades are looked down upon. Everybody in my generation, everybody in your generation, we were growing up, parents were like, no trades, go to professional degrees, get university degrees, these kinds of things. And I'm like, that's all well and good to say, but there's a whole bunch of work that still needs to get done, and it is still getting done. The tragedy of it is that it's getting done under this pretense where those people are not worth anything. And I'm like, the way I've always kind of understood it is like, tradespeople are worth the most out of almost anybody in a given society. Like, that's the infrastructural backdrop to your society. So yes, we can talk about the distinctions between, residential versus, actual infrastructure in terms of like bridges and roads and things like that. But the point is that many of those entities, we look at a plumber and you have that stereotype of what a plumber is. And that's just not what a plumber is. I mean, go interact with a plumber sometime. You'll see that that's not what they are. They're industry professionals with tons and tons and tons of knowledge and experience that make people who have been in the industry like us, like me, for like, let's say 15 years, look like I know nothing. I think homeowners will say, wow, it sounds like you know a lot. And I'm like, probably not. It's probably like university. You just like the way I articulate it better. They know way more than I do, but I just articulate it better to you. And so to some degree, I think there needs to be some homage paid to that knowledge and that skill and that craft. And that comes down to like pricing. And so when we talk about pricing a lot, and we talk about what people are worth, I think there's an element here where we're not suggesting like, hey, let's all triple our prices to be the same price as like a doctor or a lawyer. That's not the suggestion. The suggestion is more along the lines of there should be some measure of respect paid to the degree of talent, skill, and experience that you're hiring. And when that's the case, you look at pricing and you say to yourself, who should I hire? This person's, let's say, 20% lower than this person. I'm like, great. The way you should probably be thinking about money is always like, why is there 20% less? What does that mean to have it at 20% less? What does it mean to find, if you're going to go hire a lawyer, what's the $400 guy an hour versus the $200 guy an hour? Like, what is the difference there? And to us, it looks a lot of the time like the difference is a lack of like administrative oversight and organization in terms of a company. So let's say, if you want to look at the spectrum of possible options for you, you're going to renovate your kitchen. You say on one end, there's like, a cash guy working under the books, and he's going to be really, really cost effective. And I'm not even saying cash in a pejorative sense. I'm saying that there's many, many, many people that occupy that position in society as cash-based workers because there's so much stifling competition between like official so-called contractors. And so you get that guy at one end, you get maybe like, people in their off seasons of their seasonal jobs working and doing like, renovations as like a kind of side thing or decks as a side thing. They might be legitimate, they might be not. And you move kind of up the ranks and you keep going and saying, okay, now there's 2 people, they're official, 3 people. And then you get into the company model. I think the company model, if I'm talking to people about price, this is strictly opinion based, but I think a company version of contracting, at least at the level that we work at, the types of projects that we do, is more critical than like the single person situation. Because, like Ben alluded to earlier, the idea is I just called my contractor. I'm not happy with something. He won't answer me. I called him again. He won't answer me. I called him again. He won't answer me. And I'm really aggravated by this. And the truth is that whole assumption about the industry immediately takes that person to like, that person is doing this maliciously or intentionally, like dodging my calls. The reality is that person's probably like on their hands and knees in a crawl space or like stuck in an attic pulling insulation and can't pull their phone out at the moment because they're one person doing all the tasks of a business. They're trying to do the marketing. They're trying to do the website. They're trying to answer calls. They're trying to do these quotes. The quotes get less detailed, not because they're malicious or bad actors, but because they don't have the resources to do it. So I tend to think that when we talk to people, I usually say there's going to be a distinction in price between companies and not. If you're just a single person, doing your thing, you're going to be able to cut, all sorts of overhead out of the cost of your services, but you also are cutting something else. That's that idea of like, hey, think about what's being cut when that price gets cut. And usually what gets cut is the work still gets done, but communication drops, things like organization drop, things like cleanliness on site drops, things like, all those little details kind of drop. They didn't show up for a week, and then they, and then they came back a week later, and then I couldn't get a hold of them. Or whatever. Well, why do you think they might leave for a week? It's probably because they feel like they're underwater on your project, because it's almost impossible to charge what actual labor costs in a construction market, and they need to start another job. And you would say, well, that's unethical or that's horrible. And I'm like, is it? I mean, that's a person with a family too. They're trying to go out and find a way to keep the bills coming through and keep the payments coming. And unfortunately, because of the way they've set up the business, it gets taken out on the client in that scenario. That's why I just think that like a company-based version of that is better. So when they give us a call, let's say I'm in doing this, or Ben's in doing this right now, or I'm in doing a quote, as we will be in like an hour or 2 hours. Somebody can't get a hold of me. They can always get a hold of my project manager. If they can't get a hold of the project manager, they can also get a hold of the office at any given time during business hours. Right. There's multiple options for them. And similarly, when we do things like building, the foreman isn't, I can't answer my phone because I'm in the attic. No, he just gets to keep building because the phone call is coming to us. Or let's say estimation, right? The foreman doesn't need to worry about estimation, so he's not putting through quick, crappy quotes. He puts that off onto us. I do the estimation. It's much more detailed. It's much more concise for the clients. It has all the things in it that they need to have in it. And then the project gets executed. So I think like having those resources is the best possible scenario in my mind. Perhaps not for small projects, but multifaceted projects that involve engineers and architects and designers and municipal interfacing and permits and things like that. All of that, in addition to all the trade work and in addition to all the kind of work that goes on a site, I think needs a company to execute. And the benefit of it is that you get all those resources that are at hand anytime you want. The downside is, yes, it comes at a price, but that's not properly conceived. That's not a downside. That's a benefit. It's something you are paying as a value-added service for. So to my mind, I think when you talk about price, there's a confusion for a lot of people about what price means. And this is, economics like 101 is what is a price? Like, where does that come from? Yes, it comes from what the market will bear. Yes, it comes from what people will pay for that service, but it's rooted in like the cost of labor, it's rooted in the cost of materials, and it's rooted in the cost of the company's overhead and the company's profit margins, right? And so I think that when you say you're 20% more than somebody else or 20% less, just ask the question, like, why? What is that doing? Do you guys have somebody in the office full time? Is there somebody that's going to give me communications? Is your project manager going to every single night of the week give me an update about what happened on my site, anything that they see coming up that might be an issue, what the next days going forward are going to look like so you can adapt your schedules to it? Is that going to happen? And if you don't care about those things, then maybe not having those resources is a good thing for you. And having that price reduction is a good thing. The trick is you don't want those things, not pay for them, then not get them. Yeah. Then you're angry, and you probably blame the contractor because they're a contractor. But the reality is it's the whole interaction that's screwed up in that situation. It's not one person or a malicious attempt on the other end. So I think pricing is exactly that. Ask why. Ask why that price is moving. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, our industry is a little bit of the wild, wild west. If you call in a contractor or 3 contractors, you'll get 3 different quotes and 3 very different prices for the same project. You have to ask yourself why. Ask the contractors why. Have them explain why this is more, why this is less. And listen for those answers, because that's what makes, those value-added services that make a huge difference. And everyone, like Rich says, values that differently. Some people don't care about updates. They're not living in the home, doesn't matter, then maybe a lower price works for you. But when you have strangers working in your home, you want to know exactly what's going on, what the plan is, what the schedule is, what to expect. That is huge.
Yeah.
We've always liked that car analogy, right? Like the buying the car analogy. Like I know, I guess in a cursory fashion how a car works, but I don't really know how a transmission works. But I go out and buy a car and I'm like, can I see all the documentation please on the transmission? And I sit there like it looks as though I'm reading something and I'm engaged in this thing, but I'm not. And I would imagine to some degree that's what clients are like with our scopes, right? They're like, yeah, okay, like I kind of get the structural approach here. I understand what we're doing. There's a post and some beams and things like that, but they're not going to weigh very heavily into like the deflection rating of the beam. They're not going to weigh into the technical side of it, nor am I when I buy the car. But to not have that there would be strange.
Right.
Like to not know that information would be odd. Just like, am I getting a Tercel or a Ferrari? And they're like, whatever we deliver on the day.
Yeah.
Like that
It
doesn't make sense.
It helps build the trust.
Yeah.
And you know what? People will put more time into buying a car than they will into renovation. And they could be very well the same price. Renovation could be a lot more than buying a car. At least when you buy a car, you can see it. You can slam the door. You can pick your color. You read through the options. You can kick the tires. When you're buying a renovation, you can't do any of that. So we have to tell a really good story on what's involved with it so that they know what they're buying.
Scopes, designs, that kind of thing, for sure. And cars, benefit, like at the end of the day, if you think about the car analogy, like cars benefit from it's easy to go and get information about cars, right? Because like everybody is to some degree standardized. There's ISO standardization in the market. There's, people have to have their certifications for being able to sell cars. There's a regulatory body that kind of looks after it. There's, price matching across, different car manufacturers. But with us, it's kind of like Ben says, there's a Wild Wild West aspect, right? Where it's kind of just like, you're going to get different answers depending on when and who you ask.
Right.
And so I think it's harder. And our generation is a generation where if I want to buy headphones, like I spend like 3 months reading like headphone reviews and reading about like frequent. And I'm like, I'm not an audiophile. I don't know what these things mean, but I still want to like engage with it to some degree so I can feel confident in a purchase. And so I think that's what like our CPA, I think that's what the plan, I think that's what the idea of giving that detail to people does. Yeah. It gives us an opportunity to say like, you may not understand all these things, but know that you're safeguarded by all these things having been thought about by your contractor rather than just being ignored. And again, I would stress like not being ignored because the contractor is like bad or malicious, but ignored because there are real pressures on people trying to run businesses and do all the quotes and do all the things. Those, Ben knows those firsthand. There's going to come a time where if you try to scale up, you got to have employees, you got to have people to do those things, or else you're just going to come off to clients like, oh, that guy doesn't care, he doesn't answer my phone. Like, no, I was just like busy doing like a million things. Right. So.
Yeah, and I think like it all kind of boils down to what you're saying about pricing and having like all the resources and having the company model. I think it all boils down to that experience that you're providing to the client at the end of the day. Right?
And ties back to responsibility and honesty, right? Like the idea is okay, it's one thing if I say, I'm going to come up with all the pricing and there's nobody behind the scenes doing it and then I'm going to come execute the work. I think in that scenario, if something gets missed, it's almost fair that it got missed. Not that we should aim for it to be missed, but in that scenario, there's so many things that one person has to do. They're calling the subs, they're organizing the job site, they're staging the material, they're picking up the material, they're paying for the marketing, doing the marketing at night, trying to run their website at night and answer calls and this and that. There's so much on their plate. With us, the idea is, what's the value added of having the company model? Well, one quick example with transparency and honesty is, if we say we dedicate one whole body to estimating your project and then we get the estimation wrong, you paid a premium price for a premium service in the form of an estimator. And if we got it wrong, then it behooves us to compensate for that on site. So if we miss something, genuinely miss something, then the question is it's not a oh, let's fight about this and have a debate. It's no, you paid for somebody to catch these things and we didn't catch it.
Right.
So now we have that responsibility to make it right.
For sure.
Whereas I don't think you can hold like the single cash entity worker to the same level of expectation. And that's the problem, is that everybody's being held to the same level of expectation and the same price. And it's a very strange scenario for everybody involved.
Right.
So we do fixed pricing. You'll hear in the renovation, HGTV, all these celebrities, they're like, have a 20% contingency if you're doing a project for all the overruns, the unexpected surprises, the things that might just pop up. In our company, we ran the numbers last year, and our average job changed by 3%. And this is, these are multiple $100,000 projects, only by 3%. And the reason is because of our CPA service. We put all of that planning beforehand, so that we are catching everything. And if we don't, that's on us. That's why we do fixed pricing, so people can at least buy something with peace of mind, knowing that they're not going to, go over budget halfway through the project, and then go through all those stresses
and manipulate it, right? Like I'm always amazed. I think clients are also amazed sometimes when they get the final invoicing back from us. The most dramatic one, the one that I'm thinking of recently, was a bathroom, and it was like a $25,000-$30,000 bathroom, something like that. At the end of the project, we handed them back $4,000, right? Like out of that. Why? Because the way we construct our quotes is also when it's meticulously priced, when you know that like, hey, that line that says I'm going to supply and install Ditra on your floor before tile goes in, there's a material in there, there's labor in there, and if you don't do that thing, then that material and that labor should earnestly and honestly come out. And so when we do that and they make changes across their project, they're like, oh, it's cheaper to do this. I used a cheaper tile. I used a simpler layout or something like that. We don't fight people on that. Again, it's not about us telling you like what your bathroom should look like. It's about you being happy with what it does look like at the end of the day. And then the truth is, if you choose to make decisions that dramatically alter the price in your favor that way, great. Like we'll hand that money back because we're not expending that money. It's not like we're like, oh, we put it in our back pockets and now we're out of money by virtue of the fact that we don't have that project. It's no, we never expended that labor, we never expended those materials, so you get those back.
Yeah,
right.
Clients can control the cost of their renovation.
Yeah.
There's the baseline. There's the quality of the build that we can't change, but they can manipulate the price by their selections. They can choose what to save on, what to splurge on, and they're in control of what that cost is going to be.
Yeah, and I feel like that's huge for homeowners, right? To have that amount of control and like lead the project on how they want. But still, you're there. They're not running the project all by themselves. They're not like the general contractor themselves.
No,
They're hiring professionals, but they are still feeling valued and they're feeling like they're listened. Right?
Yep.
You know, you guys
And
are
it's,
listening.
I don't even think, and there's a nice feeling that comes out of it, you're right, and I think that's huge for people. There's also like the practical reality. How many times does this happen on a job site where you've got a project manager in our company, Greg, who's looking after your ledger, let's say, of all your material selections, all the variables that might kind of go up or down. Halfway through a project, you say, it's a big project, you've been here for 2 months. Greg, can I get an update on where that ledger's at? Yes. Where am I at? Up or down relative to the budget? Oh, you're down by $2,000. Great. Now, we weren't going to buy that Viking stove, but you know what? Like, we were comfortable at the budgetary range we were at. We didn't spend that $2,000 that we were otherwise going to put into this flooring or something else. Let's put it into that. It gives you also like the flexibility to control going forward, not just renovation things, but like, hey, that couch that we think might suit the area, that TV that's going to fit in that new mantle or that new fireplace. I think those things matter too, and giving people the ability to like make that choice themselves rather than us, saying, here are your 3 faucets and these are the only 3, and if you want anything other than these 3, we're going to charge you $600 extra for something. Right. Like that doesn't make any sense. We do that for trades as well, right? Like the concept is have trade people better for everybody all around. Mitch, you get an earnest and honest, straight up electrician gives me a quote, I hand it to you. You're like, great, I'm going to change a few things, Rich, take away a couple things. Great. The electrician doesn't do that work. His quote comes down lower. We pass that same savings on to you. Like the electrician doesn't feel like he's shorted in any capacity because he's doing exactly what he planned to do. You don't feel shorted in any way because anything that goes up or down, you've chosen for him to increase or decrease. And then from our end, we have a stable number that we can work with from a budgetary framework that doesn't cause us to be in these pinches where we're like, great, now how do we claw back? We don't ever have to do that. We're just kind of execute the project, and whatever you take off or add on is compensated for, right? Like, so I don't know. It's much more straightforward.